Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 5th of December 2012. Welcome to UK Column Live. With me in the studio today, I've got Mike Robinson, and via live Skype link, we've got Patrick Henningsen. We'll just check whether Patrick's there. Are you there, Patrick?
Yes, I'm you, Brian.
Excellent. Okay, well, we've got a packed programme today because it's obvious that out and about so much is happening. It's happening politically, it's happening economically, it's happening with wars overseas, and of course we've still got the massive attempt by David Cameron and the Tories and the rest of the crowd to gain control of the press and media. So Britain's under attack at the moment, and we're going to be working through some of the subjects to show just what's going on. Before we do that, of course, a comment on the weather. And I can say at the moment we're suffering from everything. We've got a bit of rain, a bit of sleet, a bit of sunshine, a bit of cloud, and it's pretty chilly. So that's life in Plymouth, England at the moment. So we'd like to start today with the New Statesman, which is a bit unusual for us, but credit where it's due. The New Statesman has come up with a couple of very interesting articles, and the first one here really sums up the mood of things, because they're saying 10 things you won't hear about while everyone is talking about Kate Middleton's pregnancy. And our prediction is that we're going to see a massive media onslaught about the royal baby as an excellent...
Sorry, Pat, could
Patrick,
you just mute your mic, please?
Yep.
Okay, I'll just repeat that. So the New Statesman is talking about 10 things you won't hear about while everyone is busy watching Kate Middleton's pregnancy. And I think this is a very pertinent comment, because we feel sure that we're going to see all of the mainstream press and media using this as a huge smokescreen to allow Cameron and Lib Dems and Labour Party, of course, to do what they like. But a couple of things that the Statesman flagged up were the fact that a senior Syrian foreign ministry official is going to defect. We'll be covering that a little bit later in the programme. That there's protest about the actions of the Israelis with the authorisation of 3,000 new settler homes. Excuse me. And also that Spain has requested an additional 39.5 billion euros from the EU in order to help its struggling banking sector. And the Telegraph has apparently reported that 37 billion of that will go to the big four banks, while 2.5 billion will be dropped into the bad bank, it doesn't say which is soaking up much of the country's toxic property assets. So well done, the Statesman, because you've hit the nail on the head. While we're watching the royal pregnancy, of course, the real damage is being done economically. And they followed this up by another excellent article called The Rise of the Shadow State, The Truth About Outsourcing. And in this article they point out, that basically money going to these huge contractors like G4S, Serco and Clearel is swallowing up sort of £3.3 billion worth of contracts. And they're talking about huge contracts now beginning to swallow up such emotive subjects as childcare. So that even the Statesman now beginning to wake up to the fact that we've basically got these massive global corporations simply running amok through the public sector and hoovering up what doesn't belong to them. You had a comment on that, Mike? No, I thought one was coming. Okay, well, we showed a little preview, unfortunately, this man a couple of seconds ago, but here we are, Mr. Leveson, of course, who's done the damage and is now running away from his responsibilities with a quick holiday in Australia. But the key thing is that the Telegraph has pointed out that his report has got some weaknesses, and they featured on a gentleman here called Brett Strobe. And what the Telegraph article reports is that the Leveson team used information from Wikipedia which was incorrect. And in particular, they named this young gentleman as being one of the creators of The Independent. So he commented in the Telegraph article, and I think his comment is is both serious and amusing. He said the fact that someone, especially a judge, has believed something on Wikipedia is kind of shocking. He added, my friend went on and edited a bunch of Wikipedia pages and put my name there. My friend did it as a joke. I thought they'd all been corrected. But of course, this is Leveson, who's been running an inquiry about standards in the press. And then we're now getting an inclination as to the lack of standards in his own investigation and report. And of course, it's a procedure which has been heavily compromised by the massive vested interest of the organisation Common Purpose and its relationship through Sir David Bell, his lead panel man, to the Media Standards Trust, and of course, Hacked Off. What's your thoughts on Hacked Off, Patrick?
The Hacked Off campaign,
Yeah.
Arguably this is something that was engineered, or at least was kind of set up in motion before the actual incident took place. I think this was definitely politically is a staged event. It's quite obvious. I think there's quite a lot of proof to allude to that conclusion that's available right now. But what it really signifies is that the government will periodically pull together these so-called inquiries in order to prepare the ground for some legislation to come afterwards. But what's really being ignored here by everybody is that we have systems in place to deal with illegal breaches of data protection and privacy. And they're called the police and the courts and the law. But what's happening is that these instruments that we have, that we've paid for and built over the years, are not being used. And the reason they're not being used in many cases is because there are corrupt people within all branches of this system that are keeping justice from coming as a result of any crime. So obviously the powerful corporate leaders in the media, like Rupert Murdoch, for instance, are part of the problem, actually. It's not so much phone hacking. I mean, the other problem here that people are not addressing, it's quite obvious that the government has passed reams of legislation over the last decade that allows it to tap your mobile phone or read your email or do any manner of invasions of privacy on the basis of national security or fighting terrorism. Totally illegal, without warrant, without probable cause. And so they're wanting to, say that this is a crime over here, but when the government does it, it's not a crime. And that's a level of hypocrisy that pretty much sums up the state of government right now in its relationship with the public.
Yeah, well, of course, one of the things that we've picked up on and we're going to keep pushing is the fact that the BBC is showing just unbelievable bias at the moment, in that it is constantly using the Media Standards Trust and Hacked Off in order to make its comment on Leveson. So we're not seeing the BBC picking up on other sources. It's a constant push of Hacked Off. And of course, we come back to this bit that we've got, I've forgotten his name now, Mr. Patton, Chris Patton, obviously at the top of the BBC. He's an absolute supporter of Sir David Bell's Common Purpose. And basically, Hacked Off is born out of Common Purpose and the Media Standards Trust. So the whole web of intrigue goes round and round. Pure bias again by the BBC. Okay, well, I know you've got more comment on control of the media and state control. Just a couple of other topics before we get on to those issues. But if we talk about the state of Westminster and the law, Kenneth Clarke's name has, of course, come up. We can confirm that allegations to the police have now been made by investigative journalist Ben Fellows. We don't know the full details, but essentially matters of impropriety have been reported to the police, and we understand that that is now going through full police investigation. So we'll keep you posted on that as we hear more information. Another man of repute who's come into the media today is Conservative MP Zac Goldsmith. and the article is saying that he's secretly engaged a banking heiress, Alice Rothschild. So we're fully supportive of a family get-together in the banking community, and we think it's great that the Goldsmiths are fully involved with Rothschild. But Zac had some comment on his relationship, which we'll bring up on screen. He began his extramarital affair with Miss Rothschild 6 years ago, and he'd originally denied that they were lovers and asserted that he'd only been making regular afternoon visits to her flat for planning meetings. We assume these were family planning meetings. So this is the key bit that you've been interested in, Patrick, the Snoopers Charter debate. We've got a slide here talking about Russia today, from Russia today, talking about Theresa May. What do you think about this? Why does it concern you at the moment?
This is pretty shocking stuff, and I think it's something that we expected. What they've done with Leveson is that they've tried to open up this public talking point that there's a problem and that the state is the only person who can save us from this problem. And so what you have is the Leveson really addressed the mainstream press, Fleet Street, the newspapers. I mean, that's an animal that we know well, and that's an animal government knows well. But it's quite clear by some of the comments and the lack of knowledge and aptitude that is displayed by our people who are in positions high on Leveson and so forth, that they understand nothing about the nature of the internet. Many of them do not even use the social networks that they're trying to legislate on. They're defining them in ways that they see fit rather than ways that they actually are. You'll find the legislation here in America, they're much more mature about the nature of the internet and the social networks with regards to civil liberties. But in Britain, it's the elite in this country. Some of them, I remember working in the city about 10, 12 years ago, and some of the directors of some of the major banks didn't even use email. They said, "Oh, that's something my secretary does." So here we have the Communications Data Bill, which has been dubbed the Snoopers Charter, okay? And we have Theresa May saying, I quote, "Criminals, terrorists, and pedophiles will want MPs to vote against this bill. Victims of crime, the police and the public will want them to vote for it. It's a question of whose side you're on," okay? So this is our Home Secretary, who is apparently in charge of, law enforcement in this country, has been unable to actually prosecute or arrest any of the major pedophiles who are running around in Westminster and at the BBC. And so clearly they haven't done anything to address the problem of corruption within the police, the judiciary, and the government to cover up for their own. And now she's trying to turn the public in against itself. So what she's done, this is a very clever thing. She says it's a question of whose side you're on. So this is the government. You're either with us or against us. So they're forcing a maxim on the conversation. That's clear kind of cult brainwashing technique normally in cults. But here we have a head of a government department using this language, which is quite divisive. And what she's doing here is they're preparing a legislation that's going to increase the state's control over the internet and users of the internet. And they use things like cyberbullying and, we talk about the McAlpine libel fiasco. They're using these things in order to increase control over users. Okay, so they'll say things like it's a breach of the peace, and they'll make it illegal for organizations like alternative media organizations in order to sort of use free speech online. So they're going to also want to Twitter and people like that to preserve data for up to a year, making it illegal for social networks and other data sites to dump their data. So again, this is the state coming in and saying you need to pay for more server space to keep data because this is for public protection. There's no danger to the public in this sort of angle, but she's spun it to make it look like it's a problem. So for instance, the social networks, they'll use the social networks to incriminate people, users, for things like what they deem as hate speech or libel. They'll also want to, and down the road, if you let this legislation go, they'll make it illegal to use an alias or a pen name, or you'll have to be licensed to have a username like DJ something or an artist name or something like that, because they'll say it's false representation of identity. This is where the control of the internet's going. You'll have to be licensed, you'll have to have your own name. It'll be like a driving license for the internet. That is where the Home Secretary is going with this, and I challenge anybody to see, to defy, the ideological path that Theresa May is taking us down.
Well, the path that I'm sure that you're talking about there is the fact that we are watching this government, and of course the previous government was doing it as well. It's a cross-party agenda, but they are taking us into what is a modern equivalent of the, I will say, the East German state. We're dealing with communitarianism, we're dealing with a corporate fascism, more than we are a sort of communist viewpoint. But all of the signs are right in front of us that we now have Westminster with a cross-party agenda where they want state control of the press and media. As you say, they're turning people in on each other. They want people to spy on each other, report on their neighbours. This is the Soviet East German system. And of course, we've warned over many years that at the back of it, we've even got the worst of that regime, which is the fact that if you dare to challenge these people, you challenge the government, then you are branded mentally ill. And we have now got people who challenge what the state is doing, being sectioned and carted off to psychiatric institutes. This is not East Germany, this is happening in Britain today. So if these people get control of the press and media, and they get control of the alternative press and media, of course we can't see what they're doing. I would say on a positive note, though, I do sense that some of the mainstream press are actually starting to think, and as we've just shown at the beginning of the programme, the New Statesman is starting to join some of these pieces up.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, just to put my tuppence worth in here.
Of course.
Just to echo what Pat has said there, and somebody in the chat box has mentioned this as well. YouTube has now started asking every member of YouTube if the name that they're using on their YouTube channel is the real name. If it's not the real name, they're being asked to identify whether they're a business or some other reason why they don't want to use the real name. So the pressure for true identity is already happening through YouTube. And of course, the other thing to note is that we're rapidly moving towards IP version 6 version of the internet, which is the new internet protocol, which means that every internet user, and in fact every device connected to the internet, will get an individual unique identifier, whereas at the moment businesses and individuals quite often are sharing IP addresses, or we're getting IP addresses assigned dynamically. This will no longer happen. The new version of the internet will be a single IP address for every individual and every piece of equipment that is attaching to the internet, and of course identity will be attached to that in some form.
Yeah, absolutely. We know that there is a massive state surveillance operation in Britain. We're not just talking at the level of GCHQ. This is also now going down to the level of local authorities. And we had a call yesterday talking about a surveillance office set up in Coventry City Council. So we're going to be following that through. But of course, even in Plymouth, statistics were revealed under Freedom of Information that Devon and Cornwall Police in one 12-month period had intercepted 53,000 emails and telephone calls. So at the moment we've got the state spying on every citizen it can, and of course they want the next bit, which is to get control of the press and media. What are we going to do about it? Talk. The exact opposite. If you're feeling nervous about emailing or use the phone, don't be nervous. The more calls you make, the better. We need to wake up roughly 40 million people. Okay, moving on. Well, the big subject is, of course, what is happening economically. This was an article from the Mirror talking about charity workers who were pointing out that desperate families are so strapped for cash they're trudging 20 miles to get their hands on free food. And the article says it comes as Chancellor George Osborne today introduces cuts to the benefit system that will leave some of the poorest families £2,000 a year worse off. Staff at the centre in Barrow, Cumbria told of their shock when they realised that a woman in her late 50s had walked almost 10 miles in heavy rain from Ulverston to collect a handout. The woman was too hard up to pay her £6.70 round-trip bus fare, so that she then had to make her way back home, weighed down by her carrier bags. So this is Britain. This is not the fault of the Tories, because of course this situation was created by Blair and Brown under New Labour. All that's happening with the Tory party at the moment is this agenda to crush the ordinary person economically is being carried on. So Cameron and Osborne carrying on the agenda to actually destroy people socially and economically in this country. And Mike, you've flagged up a fairly basic subject here of male fertility, which leads us into more of what these individuals are up to.
Well, this is obviously the Telegraph. It's a French study which has shown that male fertility has fallen sharply. I mean, they're talking about over 30%, 32.2% decrease in the last 17 years. And I think that's fairly staggering, really. They're saying that they're highlighting this as a major health issue, and we're increasingly in a world where we're looking after more and more elderly people, and we're not actually giving our young people the opportunity to build an economic base that allows them to support the older people. So by the time you and I get to needing to be in a home or something like that, it's a mature age. Yeah, it's going to be increasingly difficult for us to get the kind of support that we need in old age, and I believe that in fact they're probably going to attempt to kill us before we get there.
Well, we can follow up on that. We know we're hitting some very hard subjects today. The Mirror here came up with a very sad article, but it's a very typical one. Labour MP Anne Clwyd's husband had died in a hospital, and she said he died like a battery hen. Nobody should have to die in the conditions that I saw my husband die. He was very distressed. He made it clear he was cold and wanted to come home. The lady said that her husband was covered in too thin sheets and was shown no compassion at University Hospital of Wales, Cardiff. Now, of course, this is one of hundreds of cases that are coming to the fore. And if we have a look at the Mail here, the Mail's commenting, disbelief as nurses have to be told to put patients first, staff reminded to treat the sick with love and compassion. Now, I think there's more going on here than simply the NHS.
Indeed, the management structures in hospitals these days are not conducive to care, and that because the managers don't care, that filters right down to at every level within the hospital, and I think this is indicative of it. But
just before you leave that one,
yeah.
I think the other thing which is very interesting is, of course, we are seeing more and more training courses brought in, not only for the NHS but for the police, and staff within the NHS and the police themselves are reporting that they are seeing changes in the behaviour of colleagues. So colleagues who they got on with well, they had good relationship with, good professional relationships with, they are saying these people are changing, they're becoming different people. This is not something out of science fiction. We know perfectly well that within the training courses now, not only through the NHS and the police, but the whole of the civil service, we are seeing applied behavioural psychology, Of course, the centre unit for it is in the middle of the Cabinet Office, and the agenda is to change the behaviour of people. UK Column is going to put forward that this is not incompetence that's happening in the NHS, it's not an accident. We are seeing not only the wrong climate being introduced by the corporate control that's coming in, but we are seeing people who are being behaviourally changed in order to do exactly the opposite of what they should be doing.
Can I chime in, Brian, real quick?
Please do.
Look, the whole thing about the NHS, and you talk about the attitudes have changed and the culture has changed within that institution. And so when the culture changes, the values also change. This was brought in very sharply during 10 years of New Labour, with the increased focus on hitting targets and bringing in consultants and all these different tiers of management, basically eviscerating all the old value system that made the NHS one of the most admired systems in the world as far as healthcare goes. That is long gone, and it's very important that people realize that this wasn't a Labour or conservative agenda. This is a kind of globalist, statist, new fascist agenda. Now putting it from a public service to a corporation, more like a conveyor belt, okay? That is how the state now, or the fascist state, and they want to bring in a kind of an American Obamacare-style NHS in the near future. But it's a conveyor belt mentality where you're seen as somebody who's just keeping a bed occupied. And if they can get you out of that bed and get someone else in that bed, the corporation can make more money. Almost like the prison system in a way. Is really just kind of a cattle herding facility. That is not an exaggeration. That is how you're seen as a patient. You're a unit. You're a unit.
Well, I totally agree with that. I'd also add that, of course, we know that the political charity Common Purpose has absolutely driven into the heart of the NHS. And so the initial training, the initial tranche of people trained by Common Purpose, these were the people who were actually designed to help disrupt and destabilise the normal, compassionate working of the NHS in order to then introduce the greatest change. And we've covered the subject of these disruptors before, but of course we've only got to read Julia Middleton's book, in which she is talking about the use of fifth columns to destabilise organisations and Westminster, and the use of disruptors in order to get this new communitarian political agenda through. So the evidence as to how this has been done is becoming more and more clear. But I know Mike's going to totally agree with your comments on the American care system.
Well, this is so we understand what we're looking at here. Lifenews.com is a pro-life website, so you may have a view on what kind of agenda they're generally pushing.
Yep.
But nonetheless, I think this is an excellent article because it's talking about Britain's euthanasia pathways, points to Obamacare's death panels, and they're talking about Liverpool Care Pathway, and they're saying that Liverpool Care Pathway is being used as the framework for Obama's new healthcare system. They're pointing out, quite rightly, that Liverpool Care Pathway is not being used just to murder old people anymore. It's being used to murder sick and disabled newborn babies. And we're talking about quite a nasty form of death where they're taking away nutrition and liquids. So it's not a painless exercise to put people down in this way. And I'm sorry if you feel that anybody feels that I'm using sensationalist language here, but that's exactly, I believe, what is going on. So there is no reason, if we had a caring NHS, if we had a caring society and a caring government, then this would not be the policy.
Yeah, well, there's two things at issue, because we know that the government, of course, claims that all the problems in the NHS are to do with the fact there's no money. Later in the programme, we're going to be looking at a little bit where the government is magicking money for other purposes. But of course, it isn't simply money. It's to do with the whole culture. And at the moment, it appears increasingly obvious that there is a government plan. Now, we don't want old people. We don't want useless eaters on the state. This is the language that came straight out of Nazi Germany. We don't need disabled people. If you can't work for the state, we don't want you. And now this is the language that's coming straight out of the mouth of David Cameron. We've heard it from Blair and Brown. It's a cross-party agenda.
So in the meantime, in Greece, we're having the education minister in Greece has announced that Parliament is going to provide a food programme for school children to distribute milk and fruit. And basically, you know, the point here is they're throwing a few tens of thousands of euros at this problem, a few crumbs at people, at children who are effectively having their future health damaged through malnutrition at this age. They're throwing them a few crumbs while they're destroying Greek society and throwing millions, if not billions, of euros at hedge fund managers and banks.
Isn't this why Clegg has gone to give all of the European officials Nobel Peace Prizes, because they've now reduced Europe to the stage where the Greeks can't feed their children. Yeah, so well done, Mr. Clegg.
And in the meantime, in Europe and in Holland specifically, we now have the situation where one of the health insurance organisations in Holland is now saying that they will pay the cost for anybody who feels that they can't afford to kill themselves on the health service in Holland. So they're going to pay the cost for voluntary euthanasia if you can't afford to do it. So we now know that establishment corporations are quite happy to put people down if they so wish.
Right. There's a pattern here. We're going to follow it through. We will have some good news at the end of the programme.
Okay, so today, of course, in a couple of hours' time, we're going to have the autumn statement. A bit late for an autumn statement, I would have thought, but I think Mr. Osborne is so ashamed of the situation that he's in at the moment that he couldn't bring himself to do it any sooner.
Mike, I've got
a bit flippant.
I've got to disagree. I don't think Osborne knows what it is to be ashamed. I don't think he cares of the impact of any of his policies. So,
now, a week or so ago, we showed a graph on UK Column Live, which showed quite clearly that despite all the claims of austerity and cutbacks and all the rest, government spending is in fact going through the roof, and government debt levels are going through the roof. So here we have Osborne going for growth, and as I said earlier, I think the growth that he's going for is cancerous. But anyway, he's going to fire up to 13,000 civil servants, according to the Independent here, as a result of an extra £5 billion of spending cuts that he is going to announce later today, they say. So we will watch and see what his great plan is. But he claims that this £5 billion of spending cuts is in order to raise money for real economic benefit. Well, we shall see. In the meantime, of course, we have the Nick Robinson in the BBC pushing the propagandist line and really sort of kind of apologising for the difficult situation that Osborne finds himself in, so we'll watch with bated breath what his winter statement, his autumn statement is.
Well, we should also push the fact that if you're interested in what the simple solution to all this debt nonsense is, then have a look at the UK Column brochure on the Bradbury pound, which I know is now circulating quite widely on the internet. There is a solution. It's been shown before what the solution is, and we could solve this problem tomorrow, and so could Osborne. Sorry, I forgot his name there, Mr. Osborne.
He's a forgettable person, isn't he?
Yeah.
Okay, so in the meantime, we're sacking lots of people, but we've got £2 billion of UK money to give to the third world in order to help them go green.
Not feed themselves.
Not to feed themselves,
but to
help
green.
them go green.
Yeah.
And of course, this is taxpayers' money. So this is going to cost each household apparently £70. I guess that's per year. But this is effectively pushing Agenda 21 into the third world and making sure that Agenda 21, United Nations Agenda 21 policy becomes a foundation for third world countries and for everything that they do in the future. It's basically more killing people, in my opinion. But anyway.
I would agree with that.
Hey, Brian, just on the, you're talking about climate aid, foreign aid.
Well, this was in the mail, and yes, basically that's exactly right, Patrick. It was
£2 billion of climate
£2 billion
aid.
pounds of climate aid. That's right.
Okay, the United States. This is a global push, by the way, because the United States just announced its foreign aid program, but it's foreign climate aid. And if you know anything about foreign aid, basically what it is, foreign aid and climate aid, because they totally failed ideologically and on the science level to convince people that there was anthropogenic global warming, in other words, man-made global warming, that it's not actually happening. That's been exposed over and over. So now the only way they can get the third world or the developing world to buy into their mythology, essentially, and fake science is to pay them off with cash. Now, what it is as well is a bailout for selected corporations and consultancy firms and accountancy firms. So these foreign countries will be given cash, and they have to spend it. So if the cash comes from Britain, they will have to spend it with British institutions or companies. If the cash comes from America, they'll have to shop in Shop USA, the green shop, as it were. So it's a bailout, is what it is. They're printing money through their fiat currency, then handing it to the developing world to spend with their corporations. And obviously, if you're in the know or you're connected with government, and you've been the one who has actually been lobbying for this foreign aid program, you're going to be the recipient of that cash. It's a giant money laundering exercise. It's nothing more. It's the latest scam with regards to global warming and trying to basically monetize air, which is what they're doing with carbon dioxide. The climate exchange was a total failure. The value of the carbon per ton dropped to absolutely zero. Reported that like a couple of years ago, but nonetheless, these people are not deterred. This is the thing about Marxist, ideological Marxists, but more aptly fascist Marxists. They do not give up willingly with an idea. The only way to cut them off is to cut off their oxygen, and their oxygen is their ideas, the ideology. So we have to continue to expose this kind of fake bankrupt ideology, because that is the only thing left that's get the public's feeding off this idea. They somehow think that there's climate change. It's unbelievable that they're still pushing it. They just ignored the fact that it's been totally debunked and totally humiliated, and they've just gone ahead, raised the money through government. We still have a climate change department in this country. You're talking about government scrounging for money for public services, and they can afford to have a climate change department. Unbelievable.
Yeah. But I think we could also say it does show the power of alternative media, free media, because basically it's been that initiative which has really helped debunk the whole of the global warming scam, and of course the leaks of the East Anglia University emails, etc. So what we've seen via this is that a massive billion-dollar campaign to convince the world of something can actually be brought down by ordinary people communicating and exposing things. So a bit of a silver lining on that one, I think, maybe. Power is always a favourite topic with you, Mike.
Yeah, so
we're talking about fuels and
yes,
as opposed to any other dictatorial powers.
So Osborne's dash for gas may lead to 40 new power stations. Well, we've covered this a bit, but actually, I just wanted to say when I read that headline in the first place, I misread it as Osborne's dash for cash.
Right.
And what they're basically doing now is giving the go-ahead for further shale gas exploration. Louise mentioned this yesterday, but there was a gentleman from the industry on Radio 4 this morning, basically having the the issue of the earthquakes in the northwest brought up in his his response to that basically was, well, there are earthquakes all the time in Britain of a very low level, and really the fact that we're undermining the bedrock doesn't really matter too much. So they're going to push for the shale gas for fracking and destroying our water tables
and we'll say, if viewers or listeners aren't aware of what this fracking business is about, we suggest you start to have a look at it, and you might be very surprised and a little bit concerned. Mortgages.
Mortgages, yes. Mortgage fraud set to rise in 2013. I'd like to know how they know that.
Well, the main fraud is that the money doesn't exist in the first place, isn't it?
Indeed. So basically, Experian has come out and said that there's going to be a rise in fraudulent applications, that the majority of these fraudulent applications are most likely to come from first-party dishonest individuals misrepresenting their own financial circumstances and employment statuses.
Doesn't that include all of the cabinet at the moment?
Well, I'm just going to come on to say that because we've got all this fraud in the financial system, and really, actually, what we're talking about is such a small amount of people that are absolutely desperate to get a home, that they're sort of lying a little bit on the application form. This isn't really significant fraud. The significant fraud in the financial system is the financial system itself, and really, we need to put this into perspective. But this is another excuse not to be giving out mortgages, you see.
Patrick, Mike, I think it's interesting that they would accuse people of misrepresenting their financial circumstances when all of these banks, every single one of them, on the sort of, especially in the Wall Street and the City of London, hedge funds, etc., are trading insolvent, which is actually illegal. But of course, that rule only applies if you're a small to medium-sized business. They will come and shut you down if you're trading insolvent for over a period of time. If you're a bank, it's absolutely okay. They can also keep liabilities and count them as assets on their balance sheet. Wow, that's interesting. How can you do that as a business? Well, the answer is these banks are not businesses. They're absolute, totally criminal sort of institutions that are gambling with rules that you couldn't even get away with in Las Vegas. Okay, two different sets of rules. One for us, the borrower, and another for them, the lender.
Absolutely.
Totally agree with that. Well, we're just one small interlude here with Oliver Letwin. This is a Mirror article, and then what we're going to do is move on to the subject to Syria and overseas. But the Mirror here reporting that their reporter Andrew Gregory has been given a journalism award for his investigation into Oliver Letwin. And this was the story where Oliver Letwin was photographed dumping official papers into a waste bin in a London park. And the reporter's got a recognition for his story and the investigative journalism that followed, and I would congratulate him on that. Because what he revealed is that Letwin had thrown away over 100 papers on 5 separate occasions. Some of them included personal information about his own constituents, but other documents had got security connotations. One had alleged the Intelligence and Security Committee, which monitors MI5 and 6, had failed to get the truth on the UK's involvement in extraordinary rendition. This is the removal of so-called terrorists to be tortured overseas. So again, we've got 2 rules for ordinary people. Well, 1 rule for ordinary people, 1 rule for politicians, because of course Oliver Letwin got a smack on the back of the wrist and absolutely nothing else happened to him. Whereas if this had been a member of the armed forces that had dumped a restricted or confidential document, they would have been court-martialed. So Oliver Letwin, another one of the Tory cabal who's elitist, who can do exactly as they please because the rules are simply bent to assist them. So well done to the Mirror for actually flagging this one up. And please keep digging. Perhaps you'd like to have a look at the paedophile rings in Westminster. To serious overseas matters, we're going to take a little bit of an in-depth look with Patrick at what's been happening in the Middle East and in particular around Syria. But you've picked up on the missile systems here.
Right, so this is NATO has given approval for Patriot missiles in Turkey, and they're basically worrying about problems coming over from Syria. Do you want to comment on that, Patrick?
Yeah, the situation with the Patriot missile batteries, which NATO's wanting to deploy along the Turkish border with Syria, let's be very clear. Syria is no threat to Turkey militarily. 0.00 of a threat to Turkey. What it is they're positioning these in order to force Turkey into a diplomatic position that they cannot get out of. They're piling the pressure on Turkey right now because there's a huge divide within Turkey as to with what's going on south of their border in Syria, and also the involvement of some people within the Turkish establishment who are in the pay of the West, financially in the pay of the West. So the other reason they're going to deploy these batteries along the Turkish border is not to deflect Syrian missiles coming to Turkey. And that's normally what a Patriot missile battery does. It's also, they will potentially use these batteries to shoot down Syrian jets. As you know, they're preparing a no-fly zone, so this will be part of the envelope for that no-fly zone. They will declare a no-fly zone at some point in the near future. If not, they'll start shooting down Syrian jets at some point in order to defend their Free Syrian Army freedom fighters, as they're so called in Syria. But there's a lot of very, very underhanded things going on with Syria. There have been from the beginning. Right now, they've just sent 400 satellite phone and live link-up units, which the West have helped to fund with the Gulf states to put into the hands of all these different terrorists dotted around the country who are basically killing civilians, rounding up people, shooting them, killing Christians, suicide bombs, car bombs, you name it. That's the sort of allies the West, they've done in Libya all over again. They've even lined up someone from the Petroleum Institute, from the Carnegie Endowment, to be the future prime minister or president of Syria. Exactly the exact same system they used in Libya to put a top oil guy in charge in Libya. They're doing exactly the same thing now. There's no hiding it even. It's quite obvious on his face. So it's unbelievable. I'll let you kind of carry on with this, but there's so many things about this now that are coming into the open. It's almost unbelievable.
Well, I'd just like to reinforce your comments there, Patrick, because of course the significance of the of imposing a no-fly zone is you strip away an absolute major advantage of the nation state, of Syria, the nation state, that they can use air power to defend their own country. And of course, NATO or the West is capable of introducing these no-fly zones, which means that all of a sudden Syria will not have this air capability, and that means that they are then forced to try and deal with the insurgents on the ground, and it becomes a long, drawn-out, bloody battle. And that is, in my opinion, exactly what William Hague has been trying for. They want to reduce the thing to civil war because that then gives them the excuse. But I won't steal all Mike's thunder on this one because he's got a number of points to raise about what's being proposed in the area.
This is the same headline, but that particular Voice of America article that I'm showing at the moment was also highlighting the fact that NATO is
deploying defensive missiles?
No, that's what we've just covered. No, NATO is also reiterating the old rhetoric about Assad using chemical weapons, which I don't believe for one second that he intends to do. But the next slide we've got here is an RT article saying that, from quoting Lavrov, who's the foreign minister of Russia, saying that Syria is not Libya. And the key thing here is Lavrov saying NATO has agreed to augment Turkey's air defence capabilities in order to defend the population and territory of Turkey and to contribute to the de-escalation of the crisis along the alliance's border. And he goes on to say that we stand with Turkey in the spirit of strong solidarity. So that was the NATO statement. But then Lavrov was criticising that and basically saying that although they support the international community's efforts to find a peaceful solution, that Turkey is not Syria at all. Syria is not Libya at all, you know, the key point is here that NATO and the West did away with a head of state in Libya. He was murdered with the full support of Western governments, we now have Ban Ki-moon coming out and saying that asylum is not an option for Assad. So if Assad was to give up at this point and to try to walk out of the country alive, he wouldn't make it, basically.
So what we're talking about is the planned murder of Assad.
I believe that's what we're looking at. Do you have a view on that, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at you know, the demise of Slobodan Milosevic back in the late 90s with regards to the Yugoslavian war with NATO, they put him in The Hague, and he made an absolute mockery of The Hague before he suicided himself in the cell. Now, the biggest nightmare for power-hungry people like, you know, Hillary Clinton and globalist operators like William Hague and David Cameron is that they would capture somehow Bashar al-Assad and put him in The Hague, and he would absolutely humiliate the West, because this is not a tin pot dictator. Okay, this is Oxford educated, very adept public speaker, and a very even-handed politician. Okay, if you saw his RT interview with the young daughter Shevardnadze did a few weeks ago, you know, but Bashar al-Assad can run circles around people like David Cameron or Barack Obama intellectually. He's of a higher intellectual ability than our leaders. Okay, yeah. He makes them sound ridiculous in comparison. They do not want to let this guy have a public forum. The other thing they've done, I believe from my research this week, that the West, in conjunction with the Syrian opposition, had cut off the internet in that country, and the Western media immediately blamed that on the Syrian government. But I think it was the other way around, because they're planning a big hammer right now to drop the hammer on Syria, because the last thing they want is any journalists or any information coming out right now about massive terrorist atrocities done by the Free Syrian Army, you know, butchering people. That's where it's going to go. You saw how ugly it got in places like Iraq, but Shia and Sunni, and also in Nicaragua with the death squads and things like that, and in Libya as well. That's just what they're going to do in Syria, and they're already doing it. So if anybody thinks that Bashar al-Assad is some kind of brutal dictator and that he's killing his own people, these are absolute lies. These are lies that are put into the minds of people in this country and in Europe and in America, because they're soft enough to absorb this sort of level of untruth. Okay, Bashar al-Assad is not a brutal dictator. Okay, he's trying to hold a country together that is constantly under pressure, that's got a full militarized situation with Israel for the last 30 years, who is backed by the West to the tune of billions of dollars. This is not a normal situation. So he's, you know, maybe he's not a saint, he's not managing things perfectly, but if you compare his management skills to the management skills of people in this country, in our powers of government, I would like to put Tony Blair in his situation in the last 20 years, or David Cameron, and see how well they fare. They'd probably be running off to the Maldives after a couple of weeks on the job and quit.
Well,
sorry, I was just going to say that one of the key quotes from Ban Ki-moon was that whoever commits a gross violation of human rights must be held accountable and should be brought to justice. This is a fundamental principle. And I just thought to myself, how absolutely hypocritical, because...
Here he is, yeah, basically.
Right, so Tony Blair has not yet been brought to justice, and another sheer statement of hypocrisy from the United Nations.
Yeah, and I've got to say, Patrick, you haven't got to convince me that Assad would be a far superior intellect to David Cameron, or indeed the whole of the cabinet in Britain at the moment. I think it's becoming more and more clear that these people haven't been selected for their intellect. They've been selected because they can be used as pure puppets by the real regime behind them. But Tony Blair, still at large, surely this man needs to be brought before a grand jury and tried.
It's not going to happen, unfortunately, Brian, because Tony Blair is protected. He's protected by the same elite structure that put him in power in the first place. And he's able to, once his political career is finished, he's able to sort of capitalize on all the sort of dirty things that he's done in order to make millions, hundreds of millions of pounds afterwards. Now he's trying to get a segue back into government again, working for the fascist European superstate. That's another story.
Well, in fact, I use the phrase grand jury, and what my belief is that we are going to come to a point where it's going to be up to the wider British public to actually take control of justice. The corruption in the established courts and judiciary at the moment is so appalling that I think it's not going to be too far into the future before there's got to be some change in governance and the ability of people to run perfectly professional, fair and even-handed grand juries. That was the way it was done originally. There's no reason why it can't be done again. I'll just flag up here, we've just got 3 minutes for, we'll finish on the hour, that Veterans Today has also been looking at Iraq, and they're saying that they estimate that 3.3 million have now been killed in Iraq altogether, including 750,000 children, not only during the periods of combat, but also as a result of the economic controls that were put over Iraq following the war. So we are now seeing a whole range of people, ex-military and general public, who are starting to look in the right direction as to what's happening in the world and who's actually running it. We just briefly flag up that you may wish to comment on this one, but keep it short, that we've got a senior member of Assad's regime that they're now boasting is about to defect to the US. Can you tell us anything more about this one, Mr. Jihad Makdisi?
Yeah, this isn't anything to boast about. This is really the West they're able to find certain people that they can pay off or that they can swing over to their side. In Libya, they did this very early, even before the troubles started in Libya. They had already identified certain splits within the Gaddafi cabinet, and one of them is now number 3 in charge. He was the one of the original sort of defectors, or people that was helping to sort of foment civil unrest in that country. They've done the same thing in Syria. There's always a few very corrupt people that they can buy off early in order to sort of divide the country. So it's to call that some sort of achievement. This is on the back of all the sort of propaganda about military defectors and top Syrian military people that have gone to the Free Syrian Army. It's all about money with these sort of people at the end of the day. So the West is pumping as much as they can in, along with the Gulf states.
Okay. Well, the last slide is from Press TV, which is talking about a survey by the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, which is saying that just 28% of people in UK would approve a no-fly zone, and 72% who oppose such a move. Very interesting to see an alternative survey being carried out here, because of course we're normally just fed the government's own biased opinion. We're going to have to end there, Patrick. Thank you very much for joining us. Just a couple of notices at the end of the programme today. Firstly, thank you very, very much to everybody that's sending us letters, emails, texts and information. We have to say we just cannot respond to all the information that comes in. So if you've written or given us things, we do pay attention to it, but we can't always respond. I'll just highlight that there's an Ian Crane event in London on Sunday. You can find details of that on Ian Crane's website, or excuse me. I will be one of the speakers, and we will be talking on the current topics at the moment. We've also got Patrick, of course, Ken O'Keefe, Ben Fellows, and Ian Crane himself. So if you're in London, do come along. And finally, I will say thank you very much to all the people who've donated to us. We can only do what we do with your help. So if you feel that you can make a donation to the UK column, please do so. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us today.